As we all know, like during World War II, there's a lot of ramping up of like building ships and all sorts of military to support the war effort even before we entered into the war. And the Portland area was involved as well. There was the Kaiser shipyards both here and in Vancouver. And so many people were brought in to build these ships that we suddenly had a huge shortage of housing for them. And so Kaiser just took it upon himself to build a place that ended up being called Vanport City, which is now roughly where the Expo Center is, right up the road. And it was very hastily thrown together housing development, and eventually it had a population of 40,000 people. Soon after the war, that dropped down to about 18,000, and about 25% were African American. And the year of '48, there'd been a deluge of snow in the mountains, and when that melted, the Columbia and the Willamette both rose dramatically. And the citizens were told, they got a letter on May 30th telling them, remember, dikes are safe at present. You'll be warned if necessary. You'll have time to leave. Don't get excited. And by 4 o'clock that afternoon, the dikes broke. The water spilled in. 12 people were killed, and every single home was lost. And it's like, that's Vanport. Anyone familiar with that story? Like aware of it? Hands in the air. Exactly. And that's kind of the idea behind it, like, because what percentage of us are actually from Portland? Like, we're actually born here. Oh, 3? That's more than I thought. And I mean, it's really fantastic. We are a city of transplants, and it's fantastic. Like, that's what really adds the vitality to the city. But unfortunately, we kind of lose a little bit of our cultural identity because we don't have those lines. We don't have the history to really tie us together, which is why we have the Dill Pickle Club. The Dill Pickle Club is a nonprofit founded in 2009. They organize educational projects and that help us understand the place where we live. Through tours, public programs, and publications, they create a very non-traditional, interactive kind of learning environments, and they're volunteer-driven, and it's a fantastic. If anyone wants to know, they're named after a organization that was very similar in Chicago during like the Jazz Age. That was kind of like under the current sort of organization. So they started off with just basically like bike tours of just like very informally inviting people around and focusing on various things of Portland history. First one was Forgotten Histories, in which some aspects of Vanport and what have you. And then there's Peripheries, which focus on geographical, social, and ideological margins of society. And how does the city work, which is actually what reminded me of this, is they really tried to encourage people to understand how the city government worked. So they had one that was called Where Does Our Water Come From? Like explaining the whole Bull Run Reservoir coming into the city. How is the city planned? How is justice served? How is news made? Like how does something go from, make itself on the papers and what have you? Where does our garbage go? And how does our river work? And then they also do quite a few lectures, and one of which was called A Place Called Home, which was all about Portland filmmaking, and Northwest Passage, which focused on like Northwest music, like independent music, and one was called PDX Reprint, which discussed out-of-print books that had been printed in this area. They're also initiating various public school projects. And so they're going to be doing a 2-week workshop. Oh, they did. Sorry, a 2-week workshop for the Da Vinci Middle School, in which they had students make little comics about their lives and in Northeast and North Portland. And that's another thing that they focus on a great deal. The Dill Pickle Club is a myriad of little zines, and so they're all just little comic books that just really clearly and lays out just a little portion of Portland history. So we've got the history of biking in Oregon going back to the 1850s. the women's rights and then the whole process of that, which we were actually very much ahead of the curve on. The before mentioned Van Port flood, the lives of loggers, and I don't know anything about that. Little focus on our Chinatown and the rich history of that area, our Black Panther history, the freeways that we were going to have, unfortunately we didn't get built, and that make this city as great as it is, and it makes it so easy to pedal around, and the Lone Fir Cemetery as well, and I won't go to that one. So that was what first drew me to this organization, and really fascinated by them. But more than anything, it's just the ability they have to incorporate the history into our daily lives. So, like once I learned more about Vanport, like when it was soon after Katrina was when I learned about Vanport and realized, like obviously that had a huge impact on race relations and kind of showed what that area thought of their poor. And so Vanport was exactly the same thing. Portland officials were criticized, and after that had happened, those 5,000 folks had to find someplace else to live, and since the city wasn't very welcoming, in fact, Oregon, Black people weren't even allowed here until like the original Constitution. There was no Black people allowed in this state. So we've come a ways. But everyone had everyone had to crowd basically into the Albina neighborhood because of various zoning things and what have you. That was the only place where people of color could actually reside, and hence why the gentrification that's happening in this area has become so fraught. And it makes a lot more sense when you get a little bit more historical perspective. So anyway, I realized that like upon hearing, like all the other organizations that we're hearing about today that are just obviously really clear cut, like the Red Cross, the United Way, anything like that. It's not as clear as that, but I feel like in order to build a strong community that's very active, an organization like Dill Pickle is instrumental. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Be there for your cool result.
That's really interesting, because the need that you are bringing up is the need for community.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that, needing to tie us together. You did a nice job at the very beginning just to key in on what do we know about our community that's here. So. All right. The Dill Pickle Club. I've never, but that is pretty new.
Very new, yes.
Yeah, pretty new.
How did you learn about the Dill Pickle Club?
Working at the library.
You work at the library?
I do, it's true. So yeah, I was just shelving in our zines collection. Belmont.
Oh, that would be so fabulous.
It's pretty good. 5 years. I got a tote bag.